If you haven't noticed, movies in the box office are really struggling, and they have been for some time. For years, big name actors, big budgets, and big marketing campaigns were enough to fill a theater from California to France for weeks every year. But for the last few years, we're seeing the industry status quo collapse in front of our eyes. For generations, we had the movie star, an elite group of people who single-handedly controlled how movies performed with audiences, which in turn controls what movie studios greenlighted. Once an actor or actress had reached movie star status, they knew their worth and demanded compensation that suited their status. And studios would be happy to pay because besides the talent they offered, what they were buying was safety. When you had a Brando, De Niro, Hepburn, Washington, Pitt, Roberts, you just needed a decent script, or not even that. There's a really good chance that even if the movie wasn't a hit, it would probably still be profitable. Movie stars were the pinnacle of mass culture. Brando completely refined what people expected from a leading role. Denzel made historical movies feel so real that you thought you'd stepped foot in a time machine for 2 hours. And there are thousands more influential characters, stories, movies, and actors that have dominated mass culture for the better part of a century. But in 2025, as movies are struggling mightily to even net marginal returns, it seems like the era of the movie star is either dead or at least facing its last desperate gasp for life in a world that's clearly leaving it behind. And there seems to not really be any consistent alternative for studios to get people to tune into their projects. And no matter how hard they try, it seems Hollywood can't seem to rein in its financial death spiral. Movies will never stop being made, but what has brought the industry with so many peaks and golden ages to its proverbial knees? Obviously, and to no great surprise, the first one is cost. No matter how many headlines you read about how terrible modern movies are, we are in an era of unparalleled excellence, almost across the board. And if you don't believe me, compare Dune 1984 to Dune 2. Previously, Dune had been known to be the unmakeable movie, just due to its scale of its sci-fi world and its incredible detail. But with the right director and modern CGI and VFX, we really proved that anything is possible with the right resources in the modern day. Quality of writing in movies does ebb and flow more in the modern day than in previous generations, but due to the pure size inflation the industry has seen over the last century, this was only natural. The point is, good writing and convincing effects do not come cheap, on top of movie star salaries. Not to mention, more people are involved now than ever before, and a lot more resources are required to keep up with what audiences expect, which means much more money needs to be spent in a lot more areas. This especially hurts when people don't go to movie theaters remotely as often as previous generations. Again, we've known all this for years. Movies are very expensive to make, and going to a movie theater is way more inconvenient than getting up and sitting on your living room couch. There's less of an incentive than there ever has been before. But on that topic, streaming. It has a relatively low cost to consume, and it has completely changed consumer expectations. People want things for free or for cheap because that's something we've just gotten used to. And fair enough, that's the model they offered. And with everything else getting more expensive in people's day-to-day lives, not too many people have disposable income they're willing to throw at a second, third, or fourth streaming service. And on top of that, studios haven't really cracked the streaming code yet. Profitability in streaming has been a cause for concern for the better part of a decade. Now, as more people depend on streaming to watch everything, studios will continue to see how far they can go to extract profit from a system that's more or less designed to lose money. Most, or at least a decent chunk of these streaming services, operate at a loss, or making marginal return relative to their massive operating costs. However, studios are very clear on just how much modern films depend on revenue from movies going to streaming and at-home video rentals. This makes defining exactly what a box office failure is even more complicated. Movies that go on streaming tend to continue to be profitable for longer periods after release, whereas box office only gives us a few weeks of revenue to go off of. In an article from IndieWire, a studio executive they spoke to had this to say: "Defining a film's financial success solely on its box office would be ludicrous. Looking at a movie with anything but an overall, holistic view of a movie's life cycle is the only way to rationally assess a movie's performance," the source said. And there's some truth to this. Movies like PTA's One Battle After Another cost $130 million to make before marketing expenses, and it only managed to recoup $201 million worldwide. By the Hollywood rule of a movie has to return 3 times its budget to be successful, this movie obviously failed. But this movie is also going to be nominated for a whole lot of Oscars, which will help it be even more successful when it eventually hits streaming in the next few months. Now, we can't say for sure how much it'll make because streamers never reveal these sorts of things, But we can assume, given the size and scale of the movie, it's gonna be a pretty decent chunk of change. The same thing can't be said for something like Christie or Tron Ares, which will probably not recover anywhere near as much on streaming, even after horrible theatrical release numbers. And definitely no Oscar nominations. So the whole thing's pretty complicated. As for TV in Hollywood, it has its own unique set of issues. First of which is likely just the sheer amount of content they release in a year to keep up with consumer expectations. If studios are going to rely on streaming that's very hit or miss, essentially operating on a system that gives a show one season to prove it has staying power, or cancel it to try and recoup cost to throw out another show to see if that sticks, this is probably not a system designed for long-term success, but alas, here we are, and we'll see what happens. But this takes us over to the third reason: death of shared culture. Some of you might remember it, some of you might not, but the world before modern social media was a different one. What was considered mass culture was a lot smaller. What was considered culture was even smaller. People had a lot less to consume and a lot less to talk about. We had water cooler talk, where you discussed popular TV, movies, and shows, because everyone was watching and listening to the same thing on the same programs. Cable television or your local movie theater, the only places where you can consume TV or movies. Of course there's DVD too, but the last time we probably had anything close to this was Game of Thrones Season 8, for better or for worse. Or the few times Hollywood has managed to make event cinema actually work. That being said, is this even Hollywood that does that, or is event cinema an organic thing they have no control over? Barbenheimer or Minions showed that shared culture can include movies, but not every can or wants to be an event. Not every movie can have the same mass appeal as these sort of films. But outside of these few modern cases, nothing in particular can really motivate people to sacrifice their time and money to trek over to a theater and pay a non-insignificant amount of money to watch a movie they could so easily do from the comfort of their couch without lifting a finger in like 2 to 4 weeks. This is not to mention there's way more being made now. Look at all these shows slated to release in 2025. Look at all these movies that came out in 2025. Look at the slate of 2026. Like, holy sh! Reality TV is being pumped out at a rate no human alive could be able to keep up with. New shows are being released. Old ones dropped and then brought back on streaming services what feels like every day. There is no chance at shared culture when there's so damn much of it. Also, people just aren't watching movies the way they used to. Early in 2025, it was announced that YouTube was the #1 program used among media providers. People are watching videos like this instead of reruns or Friends of The Office. After a long day's work, who wants to throw on a 2.5-hour movie you have to actually think about? We can throw on some background noise as you scroll endlessly on your phone. And to some degree, the democratization of the media is a good thing. More people have the opportunity to create and share their own creative content, but with more creatives, there's more competition. So this sort of just might be the cost of this whole thing. Can't really do much about it. In any case, studios and distributors cannot rely on large audiences to come out because they got the biggest star, and they can't even be sure people tune into their programs more than anyone else's, especially because movies aren't even the first thing people want to do in their free time anymore. So what's the future of this industry? Your guess is as good as mine. We can assume that the era of safe remakes, sequels, and spin-offs will continue as long as it's profitable, especially since most big budget standalone films have been massive flops. My prediction? We're going to see a lot more box office bombs, just simply because studios need to do theatrical releases in order to be considered for Oscar nominations. And they absolutely cannot afford to miss out on these nominations. With that being said, these bombs will only be temporary, as the movies themselves will only be in theaters for a minimum time it takes to be considered, then immediately move to streaming. However, I do think this only works in a world where everything's being made by a major streamer, which I also think is unfortunately inevitable, especially considering recent developments. TV shows probably stay somewhere similar to where they are now, being canceled abruptly when they don't perform way above expectations, and probably running longer than they should the show be profitable enough. But hey, media is always changing, and maybe there's a future for these future legacy mediums. And maybe this is what they needed to evolve and bring whatever will captivate the next generation of audiences. Same way film and TV did for us. Who knows, but I'm excited to find out what comes next, and sad to see this era of film possibly be ending. If you made it this far, well, I just want to say thanks for listening. This is my first video, as I'm sure you've noticed. I don't really have long-term huge plans for this channel, but just want to keep making videos about things I find and things that interest me. So if you want to tune in for more, just hit that subscribe and come back. I got a few videos in the vault coming, and yeah, thanks for listening.